and he is right now. He's doing really, really well. Now, coming back to that one point, he had pretty good repair, but if you really had a good feel for what we call a Lockman's test or a pivot shift test, you could tell that that knee, the involved knee, was a little bit looser than the other one. So he wasn't getting a lot of macro motion, but he was getting a lot of micro motion. And the reason why is because he didn't have the dynamic musculature to stabilize his knee. So he was getting more motion in the knee, which was making it sore. So once we strengthened him, and it's not just a matter of pure strength, okay, but it's posture, it's the whole, looking at the whole kinetic chain. Once we had his movement efficiency doing well, then he was not going into his Trendelenburg effect. He was jumping and landing off of both legs, which he had not done in over a year. He was afraid to do it. Okay? So these are the kinds of things that we can look at through these different technologies, where before we had them, it was all subjective. When we talk about the FMS and the SFMA, okay, and we're going to talk about Fusionetics platform, this stuff is, to some extent, subjective. You know, you tell the player, you know, put your arm back here, right? And then you sort of look at it, you know, you write down the score. That's subjective. This stuff is 100% objective. There may be error that's involved with it, but, you know, you can't argue with the sensor. And so with the knee analysis, you know, what we're looking at is valgus going in, varus going out. And really what we want is we don't want valgus or varus, right? We want them to be at neutral when they land. So you can see this person's testing out here, okay? He's minus 6 degrees of valgus. That's not good. He's not in the red zone, but he was where Larry Nance was, okay? Larry moved from yellow to red, and that's when we shut him down. So we got to rehab here and get that person back into this green zone. So the hamstring module is going to test for hamstring, both active and passive. Active, they're bringing their leg back. Passive, you're bringing their leg back to see how far they can go, and also the speed at which that happens. And so then you end up with kind of a neat little graph like this, left and right. And you see the range of motion here. You see there's 81%, 81 degrees on their right leg, and there's 85 on their left. So there's minus, actually this should be 4, but they're minus 4 degrees on their right leg. So they're losing range of motion on this side. Why? I don't know. We have to examine it. Maybe their pelvis is tilted. And then there's the speed at which they can contract their hamstrings. And then there's the functional module. I'm not going to go down this list because I'm going to show it to you. Okay? So the functional module is going to show us range of motion, quality of movement, and deviation from the start position. And it's going to have similar tests that you saw with the FMS. Okay? There's going to be the hurdle test, the inline lunge, and the bird dog test, where you see there is weight bearing on left knee and right arm, and then you reverse. It's cute, isn't it? Overhead squat, push-up test, plank test, the segmental flexion test, extension test, this is segmental as well, and rotation test. We're looking at this technology that's called STIKU 3D scanning. It's very interesting. You find it in a lot of health clubs. You don't find it in professional sports very much because they're just simply not there yet. Okay? But I'm working with them. And so what they do is they use some Microsoft software with an infrared camera that shoots 30, it's a 30-second scan. I don't know how many images. Okay, it's not on here, but it's a lot. But the interesting thing about this is that it captures millions of data points. And then puts it in a regression equation with your gender and your age and your height and your weight. And it spits out information, but the information that they're working on, which is not what I'm interested, is information that's related to morbidity. Okay, morbidity meaning diabetes, heart disease, and stuff like, once again, not the freak population that I work with, but if your waist size is greater than your height, then you're slotted in a category of being somewhat morbidly obese and more susceptible to diabetes and heart disease. And if you're going to a health club to work out, that's pretty good information. For me, I mean, we're not in that population. But maybe there's things with these millions of data points that I can pull out, working with them to create a software so that we can see their postural alignment. Maybe I can actually see their pelvis tilted, okay? Or one shoulder higher or lower than the other. Interesting concept that I'm working with them. Since the invention of basketball, we've been measuring height, right? If you're tall and you're a kid, they make you play basketball. It's logical, right? And how do we measure it? We measure it from the floor, bottom of your foot, to the top of your head. But what about this measurement? From your shoulder to the top of your head. How important is that in basketball? Other than, if you're a perimeter player, and you have a couple of more inches in your neck, you might be able to see a little bit better. But functionally, nothing happens between here and here that helps you functionally on the court. So I think we've been sort of looking at this thing all wrong, because just look at, once again, when you're walking around today, start looking at people's anatomy. You see people with like a really big neck, and you see people who don't have a neck. Their head sits on top of their shoulders, okay? And so what about those inches there that we're measuring? We're saying, oh yeah, this guy's 6'9". Well, he's really maybe not 6'9", He's got like 3 inches of neck, okay, that really isn't functional, okay? So I'm trying to help them create software that's sort of, we're looking at an anatomical structure maybe in a different way than we've been looking at it traditionally. And so maybe the best way to look at this is to measure from their AC joint to the floor, right? And then maybe from their AC joint to the base of their navicular, which is about the center of the medial longitudinal arch. And then do it the other way, okay? And now we can see if they're tilted, listing to one side or the other. Why? Why are they doing that? Maybe they have a leg length discrepancy. Okay? Maybe they don't. Maybe their pelvis is tilted, which we call an apparent leg length discrepancy, as opposed to a true leg length discrepancy. So I'm throwing this out there to you. You can Google these people. You can look at it. We're not there yet. Actually, to be honest with you, none of this technology is there yet, but we're getting there. And like any technology, it's big, it's slow, and it's expensive. And as time passes, it gets smaller, faster, and cheaper. So just be patient. Let us do our thing, and all this will come to you. This is what the platform looks like. So you see where the feet are. You stand on that thing. It spins around 360 degrees in 30 seconds in front of this camera, and it gives us, through a regression equation, okay, they'll predict your body fat. The body shape and the body ratios are probably pretty spot on. And you get something that looks like this. Get a chart that looks like this. And then, as sports medicine practitioners, I kind of look at that and I go, okay, what can I figure out from that? There's girth measurements there. That might be important. There's leg lengths. I mean, I just gave you a part of it. You get a full body. Okay. So we're working on that stuff. Now the CME-X thesis, this is the lab that I sent Larry Nance to. I would love to, we're building a new $60 million facility And you would think 250,000 is not a big number when you're spending 60 million, but you know, professional sports is really interesting. They'll swallow a buzzard and choke on a net sometimes. It's amazing. I would like to put this system in, but I don't think it's in the budget. So what it does is it's going to give us dynamic movement analysis in real time. Uses LED markers. You get a 2-camera system or a 4-camera system. 4 is obviously better. You can get live streaming, like Troy was talking about, or you can put it on video and go back and look at it later. There's biofeedback, so the player can actually see his movement on a screen and then correct it, which brings up something. In our gym, we have 3 gigantic mirrors that are probably the width of this black box to that black box, and maybe as high as this. And they're on wheels. And I show up one day, and there's these 3 big giant mirrors in the gym. What is this for? Come to find out, it's for the Laker girls, the dancers. Okay? So they come in, they dance in front of the mirror. But it got me thinking. So I can't have my guys looking at me, you know what I mean? So I have them build these like drapes with Laker logos so you can't see the mirrors. But every once in a while I pull them out. And sometimes when a guy gets hurt, or certainly when he's had surgery, he develops what we call a limp pattern. Okay, you limp because you have pain. But eventually the pain goes away, but you're still limping. And it's because you've developed a neuromuscular pattern. You've trained the muscles to fire that way. So you tell the player, hey, stop limping. You got a hitch in your gait. No, I don't. I don't feel it. Trust me, you do. Okay. But I don't feel it. I said, okay. So I take 2 of the mirrors, and you can't put them baseline to baseline because that's 90 feet, that's too far. But we put them sideline to sideline, which is 50 feet. And I have them run towards the mirror. Turn around, then run back towards the other mirror. And as soon as they see it, they correct it just like that. You have to do it over and over again, and they'll rehabilitate their neuromuscular pattern. So this you can do it live in front of the screen. It gives you biofeedback. There's a data report, and you get pictures. So the test that you do, the guy that I work with on this is Dr. Chris Powers out of USC. He's a brilliant biomechanics guy. This system exists. I mean, people can buy it, but it's also being able to interpret the data, and that's what separates Dr. Chris Powers from the rest of the world. So what we do is we do a step-down test, we do a drop jump, a triple hop, a side cut, and a lateral shove. And what we get back are readouts for ground reaction, force, direction of ground reaction, muscle activation level, and joint forces. And basically we get pictures that look like this. Now remember I talked about the squat and how the lower leg, okay, should be parallel with the torso. Well, you can see he's leaning just a little bit forward, okay? So that tells us something, okay? And then we get a readout that looks like this. Now this looks pretty good. Remember we talked about the Trendelenburg, the valgus instability? But he looks pretty good in neutral. Let me see, put my glasses on. His valgus, he's 1.2 degrees in valgus. That's nothing, basically, right? Now, if he was, you know, not this particular person, I don't know who it is, okay, but if he was extremely in valgus, that would tell us that, and we would be able to correct that. So another platform is the Fusionetics platform that was created by Michael Clark. It's a movement efficiency platform, okay? It gives you a range of motion assessment. It spits out corrective exercises, which I'll explain in a second. It gives you a systematic performance training regimen, okay? And it gives you some enhanced recovery. It's a scoring system of 0 to 100. So once again, this is subjective in nature. Unlike the CME or the viperform. It puts you in a red, yellow, green zone. You can monitor their progress and improves decision making. You get something that looks like this. So, you see up here it says leg squat, all right? And you ask the person to squat like 3 times and then hold the third one. And then there'll be questions. Did the person's feet turn out? Yes or no? Did they have to lean forward? Yes or no? That's all it is. It's yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. There's no measurement that's involved. It all gets put into a regression equation, okay? And it spits out scores. So if you're in the green zone, then that body part, you're fine. If you're in the yellow or red zone, then it flags you. It puts you in poor, moderate, or a good situation, and it actually gives you, it spits out an exercise for you to do. It's like idiot-proof, okay? It's a nice, tidy little platform for lower level stuff, okay? I mean, you're better off if you're going to go subjective with FMS or SFMA, you know, and you're much better off to go objective with the CME or the viperform. But if this is all you can do at that level, then it's better than nothing. So, all we're talking about here is, we talked about assessment, right? Talked about correcting it. Now once you've done that, now you can go into your performance training. But before you get there, we have to do our corrective exercises, which are going to be core exercises to begin with. So what's the core? Lumbopelvic complex, the thoracic spine, and the cervical spine. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to stabilize you between here and here. Once again, we talked earlier, so you can transfer forces either from the lower extremity to the upper or the upper to the lower. So when I hear people talking about core, they're still talking about abs, okay? That's not what we're talking about. I want you to think of a different concept. I want you to think about the core as the core of an apple, the deep pelvic floor muscles. And there's 29 of them that attach to the lumbopelvic hip complex. There's an inner unit and outer unit. The inner unit, which is more important than the outer unit, is going to be the transverse abdominis and the internal oblique, primarily the multifidus and the lumbar transverse spinalis. The outer unit, these I'm not going to combine, you can see them, you can read them when you get this presentation later. So I keep hammering this, okay? You got to start thinking that the body is not just a bunch of muscle groups that are concentrically moving your skeletal through space. Because before you can move efficiently, you have to be stable. So the 3 ways that we stabilize the pelvis is the thoracolumbar fascia, the intra-abdominal pressure, and the hydraulic amplifier system. So this is going to get a little hairy right now, all right? But just bear with me on this. So the thoracolumbar fascia, it's fascia, okay? It's not contractile tissue. Muscle contracts. Fascia doesn't contract. So this is like a big giant ligament, okay? Because ligaments hold bone to bone, right? Tendons connect muscle to bone. Muscle fires, pulls on the tendon, pulls on the bone. You move. I just got done saying this, the 2 most important are the transverse abdominis and the internal oblique. When you have intra-abdominal pressure, it pushes up against the viscera, superiorly and inferiorly, resulting in an elevation of the diaphragm and contracting of the pelvic floor musculature, creating core stabilization. Does everybody know what a Kegel exercise is? I know you do. You're a woman, not you. You guys know what they are, right? Okay, Kegel exercises are contracting the pelvic floor muscles. And they were invented by Dr. Kegel. And they came out of postpartum women who had babies, because many women, after they have a child, they become incontinent. They can't control their bladder. So he figured out that if they can do these exercises and contract the deep pelvic floor muscles, then they can control their bladder. So for a guy, you guys don't get it. Let me explain it to you. When you drink a lot of beer, what do you have to do? You gotta go to the bathroom, right? Okay, let's say you're not near a bathroom. So you go and find a tree. And you're behind the tree, and then all of a sudden you look, and here comes some people walking. And you gotta stop midstream, right? You just did a Kegel. Okay? That's a Kegel exercise. It's contracting the deep pelvic floor muscles, and that's what we're trying to get to when we're talking about core stabilization. Much different than what many people think. Okay, this is going to get a little interesting to you. At 45 degrees of flexion, the thoracolumbar fascia does not have any contractile tissue. So we're talking about is dynamic stability versus static stability. Static stability are ligaments holding bones together. The ligaments don't contract, they're just static stabilizers. But that's not enough for you to have a good, stable skeleton. You have, especially in sports, you have to have dynamic stability. Your muscles have to contract to stabilize joints. Well, at 45 degrees of flexion, so this is 0 degrees, I'm standing straight up. If I bend in half, that's 90. If I get to about here, that's 45. There's absolutely no muscle stabilizing my spine. That's where a lot of people herniate discs. They do it getting out of a chair. So if you're pretty good sitting posture right there, if you just stood up just the way you were, you'd be pretty safe. But if you bent over a little bit and stood up, you might herniate a disc. Just standing up. You're not trying to pick up anything or do anything else. Because the load went to that place and you didn't have dynamic stability. Where we see it in basketball is defensively, when a guy gets like this. So it's a big problem. It's when God created our body, he kind of forgot about that part. He didn't think we were going to play basketball. So when we have weakness of the transverse abdominis, and especially the internal oblique, then we're going to have, it's consistent with low back pain. So when people come in and see you with low back pain, you want to start looking at this stuff. Okay. If you start doing abdominal training, you're trying to create your six-pack without creating the core stability first, then you're going to put a lot of pressure on discs. If you're doing hyperextension training without core stability first, you're going to put a lot of pressure on your disc. Part of the core is the cervical spine as well, and we've already sort of talked about this with the upper cross syndrome. I'm not going to beat a dead dog, but really what you need to concentrate is on the sternocleidomastoid. Okay? Because as that's recruited, it's going to compress C1. And when it compresses C1, what's going to happen is you're going to get this. It's going to come back. And that is going to activate that. So because the problem started here, it's going to end up here. And I'll tell you why. So now you got an overactive sternocleidomastoid, which is going to extend your head. And so now your eyes are going to start looking up there, right? But you can't do that. So to realign your eyes, your pelvis tilts forward. And so now you're like this. But it all started here, not here. So people come in with low back pain, maybe you don't start with their back. Maybe you start looking here first. So, I don't expect you to walk out of here and know what to do. I'm just trying to open your mind to looking at the entire kinetic chain. 30 years ago, we looked at the distal end of the kinetic chain. We looked at the foot strike first and how everything went up the kinetic chain. Now we don't look at it that way anymore. We look at it here, and then we move out and up. So the whole idea is to get ourselves in pelvic neutral and keep us there. So we keep using the term core strength, right? Everybody's heard core strength. Well, it's really not strength, is it? Okay? It's actually core endurance. Because when we talk about strength, okay, I'm going to jump a bunch of slides, so when we get to them, we'll just fly through them. Strength is your ability to generate force. Power is your ability, is how quickly can you generate it, and endurance is how long can you generate it. So the type of musculature that we're talking about isn't the type of musculature that we're trying to generate a lot of force. It's a type of musculature that we're trying to have endurance. So it keeps you in your correct posture so that you don't fatigue and go back into your default position. So once you fatigue, then you slip back into bad posture, right? So if all of you right there are even sitting with poor posture, if I said corrected your posture and you sat upright and you were really good, see how long you could hold it. Eventually, you would drop down into your default position. So the idea is to train this not to generate force, but to generate endurance so you can hold that posture. And once you've been able to do that, you will have a stable core, which means you'll have more efficient movement. If you're looking for someone to read the literature about this type of stuff, Diane Lee, her book, The Pelvic Girdle, is the way to go. So we've talked about transferring forces. We just want to make a point that we need to transfer the forces contralaterally, right to left, left to right, right? You don't walk like this, you do it this way, right? So when you run, those forces have to go that way, and so the way that works is that there's four slings. There's an anterior sling, okay, which goes from here to here, here to here, and then there's a posterior oblique sling. That's the opposite, okay? There's two more slings we're going to go through, okay? There's a deep longitudinal sling, and there's a lateral sling. So it's not only addressing these slings individually, but making sure that they work together, okay? They're operating efficiently together. And once you have all that stuff, now you can transition into performance training. So before we get into performance, though, now we got to do another evaluation, right? Because the other evaluations were basically orthopedic evaluations, postural alignment stuff. Now we got to see what you're made of, what kind of anthropometric stuff. Body comp, strength, power, endurance, flexibility, balance, reaction time, agility, average speed, load per game, and intensity. Body comp, you know, we really don't know, right? To really know what your body composition is, we'd have to kill you, dissect you, and, you know, weigh your fat and your muscle, and, you know, see how much water weight you have. But the American College of Sports Medicine came out in 2013 with these numbers, that a male athlete needs about 2 to 4% of essential fat, and they range between 6 and 13%.